And now for our first speaker, Debra Bowen, Secretary of State of California.
Good morning. It's great to be here at Theodosia. That's TED, feminized, right? I'm waiting actually for the day when we're really equal, when women are really equal, and I think we're going to know that's here when instead of having TED women, we find our male counterparts needing to establish something called TED men. And that instead of having a Women of the Year celebration in the California legislature, we have a Man of the Year celebration. So we have come a long ways, baby, but it's still only 90 years since women got the vote. Although it certainly cannot be said that women were not very creative in what they did before that. The first woman was actually elected to the United States Congress before she could vote for herself. Hard to imagine that. My job, the part of it that you all probably think about the most, is that of Chief Elections Officer, although if you have any kind of corporate or partnership entity that you're responsible for, I'm sure you've seen my auto-penned name on some document or documents. Quite a shock to walk into your own office when you're first elected and find thousands of documents that have been signed by you. If you will, that it's 2005 and that the country has been in a swirl of controversy about our election systems. That we've had a presidential election that was ultimately decided by a decision of the Supreme Court, that there are a lot of people who are concerned about that, that in the next presidential election, American citizens saw film of voters in Ohio standing in the rain for 9 hours waiting to vote, while in precincts 2 hours away, 2 miles away, there were no lines at all. We heard allegations of this and that kind of wrongdoing, and a small group of citizens was really focused on a new kind of problem, and that was, what happens if we decide to improve our elections process by harnessing the power of the microchip? And we did that very quickly in some places, and as a result, we were getting reports of things like 7,200 people voting in a precinct in North Carolina, only to discover that the server in that polling place was set to retain 3,200 records, meaning 4,000 people came, voted, and they aren't recorded. And it takes a while to figure out whether it was the first 3,200 or the last 3,200 who had their votes counted. Meanwhile, a group of, a woman actually, a journalist in the state of Washington who got curious about all of this stuff, started doing some poking around on the websites of the companies that manufacture voting equipment, and discovered on a publicly available website all of the source code that runs the voting machines for that company. She, being a journalist, downloads all of it. The company discovers the problem, closes the barn door. Of course, the horse is already long gone, and the horse is off to Princeton and to Johns Hopkins, where a group of intrepid computer scientists start pulling apart the systems and putting reports of the problems on the internet. And a group called Black Box Voting is born. Black Box being the ultimate in anti-transparency. And it's about this point that a young state senator, well, really not that young anymore, sorry, named Debra Bowen decides to run for Secretary of State, in large measure because of the problem with voting systems and this strong belief that I have in democracy, this young system that we have, this really incredible experiment in self-governance, just a blip, an eyelash in the time of human history, almost, invisible, but really, really amazing as an experiment, and an experiment that's well worth keeping, refining, pursuing, but that is in trouble in some respects. And the trouble is grave enough so that at some point I'm handed a bumper sticker that says, "Make vote counting a hand job. Prevent unwanted presidencies." Man, that is serious trouble we are in. And so I decide, well, I'm going to wade into this. Being a geeky type, being a type who, when I first got to the legislature in 1992, which is sort of an accident in and of itself, I was just simply too naive to know that you didn't just run for the legislature. And I did. I was a community activist, but I also have a law degree from the University of Virginia, which Thomas Jefferson founded because he did not believe that democracy would survive if people weren't educated. And that's something that I carry with me. So I put that together with this kind of geeky streak that led me to introduce this bill in 1993 to put all of the legislative information that we have, which I discover is digital. On the first day I walk in, it's all on my... It wasn't a laptop or a desktop, it was a dumb terminal. But it was all there, but you couldn't have access to it from outside the building unless you paid a vendor a couple $100 a month or a minimum of $2,000 a year. And yet it's the information that taxpayers paid for to create that's essential to them being able to monitor their government. And I introduced this bill that said, let's have a dial-up bulletin board system, because that's the only model I was familiar with. And a couple guys from Silicon Valley, and they were guys, came into my office and said, no, you want this to be posted on the world's largest non-proprietary computer network. And the bill, the first in the world ever experience with putting information about the legislative record, legislative history online for anyone in real time, came about as a result of that work, and qualifies under that rubric of too naive to know you're doing something that's not possible. And really, when I look back at it, we're dealing with the same issues. I had a legislator tell me, somebody's going to hack all of my voting record, and it's going to look like I voted for every tax increase ever. And then there's the control issues, and I had somebody tell me, how am I going to know what my constituents care about if they can go online and get bill information and they don't have to call me? Yeah, think about that. Then I had somebody try to, actually the bill for a while had a provision in it that would have required payment for access, because we had an administrator in the legislature who had a vision of creating a profit center. And he was going to charge for all of this stuff. And I, as a new member, didn't know how to deal with this. And I went home, and I had this nightmare of Thomas Jefferson putting the Constitution on the home shopping network. And I thought, if I can't get this out of this bill, I'm going to, basically kill my own child here, not do this, and we'll come back until we can do it right. Because this is a first, and it's going to be a model. And we were able to get it out of the bill, largely because two guys from Apple spent all weekend writing a front end, and that took away a price tag this is $1993, an estimated $800,000 price tag for doing this project. They did it in a weekend, so obviously it wasn't $800,000 worth of work. But that is how I got into this. And I took on this task of looking through what's going on in the voting system because I felt that the country, the democracy, could not survive another presidential election in which there were significant questions about the integrity of the process. And the more I looked and the more I delved, the more difficult I found the problem to be. And the other thing I'm going to talk about a little bit, and it's really, really apropos as of this morning, and a lot of what I'm talking about is not in written anything, but this morning we're hearing Wikilinks. We're hearing, and I'm saying we're hearing on purpose because I can't verify it, but we're hearing that Amazon was shut down for a while. We're hearing that MasterCard was the subject of a massive denial of service attack for refusing to process payments in support of WikiLeaks. We're hearing all kinds of things that are important as we think about the future of voting, and as I answer the question that I get asked a lot and that I will address in a little bit, which is, why can't we vote on the internet? But the first thing we had to do is look at how our voting was in the state of voting. And many of us in California and a lot of places were voting on touchscreen electronic voting machines that recorded the vote only on a chip. And there was no way for a voter to verify that what was being recorded was identical to what they had input. There wasn't even what we have now in some places, which is this thing that looks like a cash register tape that goes along the right side of the voting machine under a really scratchy plastic cover, and where you actually, technically, you can compare what's on the touchscreen to what is over there on the paper. Simplest programming thing in the world, of course, is to program, record this and print that. There's no reason that those have to be the same, but you have to be pretty geeky to know that, right? That's not something my grandmother would know. And the challenge in all of this is to be fully transparent in the system and absolutely private when it comes to how the ballot is cast. And that is what makes this so difficult. There is no way to go back and audit because we don't know how you voted. And we shouldn't be able to know. And so we can't go back and say, all right, well, here is what she did at the ATM, and here's how this was recorded when it got to the bank. So that's one of the problems. The second is that we don't have a do-over, and we can't fix problems with money. And in the ATM or banking system, if you have a problem, a denial of service attack or any other kind of problem, you can fix it with enough money. You basically can put the money back in somebody's bank account and, they're not happy, but they're okay. Can't do that with voting. Has to be 100% correct. And let's assume for a second that the error rate at ATMs, and we don't know because the banks don't have to tell us, let's assume it's 1%. Are you willing to have a 1% error rate in your voting system? Anybody good for that? No? Okay. So really difficult challenge. And we had a system where essentially you could not verify that what was being cast on the touchscreen was being recorded. No way to audit. And then just basic simple problems like calibration. Voter number 432 on that touchscreen had barbecued chicken for lunch, didn't wash his hands thoroughly, left a grease streak on the screen, and voter number 433 is casting an entirely different ballot with the same touch than voter number 431 would have because the screen isn't clean. The area that you designate as what's sensitive to be touched makes a difference. And when we look back at some of where the problems were, it's clear that that was the problem. People tapping here find that what was recorded was not what they intended, and because there's no way for them to verify that, there's no external verification mechanism, that's just how it gets recorded. So when I took office, I did a top-to-bottom review of systems. I engaged public and private computer programmers from around the country, and indeed around the world. And not only did I ask them to look at the code, and part of the problem when we talk about transparency is that in every single voting system currently in use in this country, the code is proprietary. That means that nobody in this room can look at it, unless a grandmother from Washington State found it on the company's website and downloaded all of it. And security is security by obscurity. It relies on nobody having access to the code. But if a grandmother downloads it, or, as also happened, if a voting machine goes missing, and we know in California that we had a poll worker whose vehicle was stolen with a voting machine in the trunk, never recovered, we don't know where it is. all of a sudden somebody can reverse engineer everything. So we quickly came to the conclusion that we didn't know what had already happened. We couldn't be sure that a virus had not been introduced to one or more voting machines, because they have electronic media that's interchangeable. And we couldn't be sure that somebody hadn't cleverly installed a virus that would then be replicated once the results were uploaded by moving that to the mainframe and then having that move back down to every single voting machine before the setup for the next election. And the result of all of that was that I decided that in California, we would not use touchscreen electronic voting machines except on the very limited basis mandated for accessibility, one per polling place. And in many counties, that one sits there because many disabled voters solve their voting problem by voting by mail, which is really easy to do in California. It was controversial because we had several $1 million worth of equipment that's now sitting in a warehouse, functionally electronic junk. But we went to optical scan, which is old, boring, cheap, reliable, and you can recount and you can see the voters in time. It's not perfect because if the voter doesn't fill the ballot in right, the machine won't read it right, and if you don't calibrate exactly right, of course, you won't get it right. But you have an opportunity to go back and recount. So that's what we're doing right now in California, and that's why. But I still get asked this question of, why can't we vote on the internet? And of course, the first problem is the internet is not secure. Never has been, and everybody who's ever downloaded a patch or dealt with a virus understands that. The second is this problem of we need to know who you are before we allow you to vote, but we can't know anything about how you voted. If I give you a number and say, here's your voter number, how do I know it's you who's using that number? How do I know you didn't sell it to a campaign for $1,000 or have it stolen or have your employer coming over and saying, okay, you can put that number in now? Let's see how you're going to vote for governor, because we're really interested in this question here at Silicon Valley, Inc., or any other business. Or it could be your grandmother. I know lots of people who don't want their grandma to know how they voted. I also know grandmas who don't want their grandchildren to know how they voted. We don't have a good way to do that. We don't have a way to audit. Now add in what we're just seeing with WikiLeaks, which is how important elections are and what the incentives are around the world to disrupt a United States election. Some of those might be domestic disruptions. You want to change the nature of the vote? Denial of service attack in an area of a state where you know that voters of a certain political proclivity are more likely to live. Make it harder for those people to vote with a denial of service attack. But we're seeing that what we get is foreign governments involved in this and foreign actors who we have no control over. And I was really struck by this when a denial of service attack took down, and you know the company. It's the largest tech company in the world. It's a household name. 24 hours. They couldn't get their access to their service back up because of a denial of service attack. There's no way right now to get around that. So, and we don't have the opportunity to build a secure network of our own. Well, we could build a secure network of our own, I suppose. In California, it's about 17 million voters. Right now we have about 25,000 polling places. Start doing the math of the bid for what it would cost to build a secure network to go to 25,000 locations. Or if you don't want polling places, that's fine. Just, how are you going to do a secure network? You're going to rely on somebody's cell phone. What's that network like? Last night, because of the Google and HP conferences, none of us could get on the internet around here. None of us. And our hotel reservation had been dishonored. And it was 5 to 12, and we needed 3 rooms. And we couldn't get on the internet. Oh, my God. Who could imagine such a thing? So the bottom line of all of this is, at this moment at least, the best system we have really is a clunky, old-fashioned paper ballot marked by the voter and scanned with an optical scan machine. The biggest improvement I could make on it would be to have that optical scan ballot generated by a computer so that we could eliminate marking errors, so that if a voter voted for a certain thing, we would know that the optical scan ballot was properly marked. That would eliminate a lot of the problems we have. People drawing a flower instead of filling in the bubble, or writing yes, yes, yes in the margin, which does not qualify as a vote. Or not unless you look at everything. It does on a recount in some states because the voter's intent is clear. And it is voter's intent in California that qualifies, although not in Alaska, where it's how you filled in the bubble that makes the difference. So we get into this, and it's really, really interesting. We all want to make voting the simplest we can because we want every citizen who's eligible to be able to vote. But we also want this democracy of ours to have a voting system that's worthy of it. We want transparency. In the end, the proprietary systems have to go, and we're going to have either open source or disclosed code. That writing's on the wall, and that's the way that's going to happen. But we also have this constraint of having to have absolute privacy with the nature of the vote. So voting, I think, presents one of the most unique challenges that ever existed in the field of computing. I hope that some kid in second grade is coming up with a system that solves all these problems. And I'll go back to that hearing when I was carrying the bill to put the legislature online. I had a senator tell me, prankily, nobody's going to use this. Remember, it's 1993. And I said, sir, it's not for you. It's for the kids who are in second grade now. You know what? The kids who are in second grade now are voters, and they have iPads, droids, and all of that, and they use this stuff. So this is a challenge to second graders, seventh graders, somebody with a great creative streak. Please figure out for me a better way to do this. And then find me on Twitter, it's Debra Bowen, or on Facebook, or call my office or fax. You can even write a letter. We still open things with stamps. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I didn't want to be the first to cut off our Secretary of State. So welcome our next speaker, Jill Tarter, the Director of the Center for